Alright everybody, so this is the last video of Module 2, Lesson 2, and we're just going to review some consequential presidents in the development of the United States. So let's start with the man himself, George Washington. Washington's big contribution to the presidency is solidifying presidential prestige. More than any other president, Washington was someone who was above reproach. He was not somebody who was criticized. He was a unifying figure. And even when alive, he almost had this mystic importance. And he also asserted the executive's authority in foreign affairs. And he empowered his Secretary of State to be a very powerful diplomatic figure. That Secretary of State, of course, was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson credited himself for the official separation of church and state. He also um, doubled the size of the United States by purchasing Louisiana without congressional approval. Not sure that he was allowed to do that to this day, but he did. Jackson really is America's first populist president. This is someone who really campaigns as a man of the people, even in opening up his inauguration party to crowds who had to be distracted as they destroyed the White House by setting up beer stands on the White House lawn. True story. Polk, he provoked war with Mexico and obtained much of the American Southwest when he won that. Lincoln, of course, used troops without presidential power, congressional power, and used a number of emergency powers to issue martial law across the United States during the Civil War. Teddy Roosevelt, he expanded the presidency and himself became the nation's diplomat. So Teddy's really famous for negotiating an end to the Russo-Sino War. This was a war between Japan and Russia. And he really became kind of the symbol of foreign policy abroad. He also deployed troops across the world, and he created the national parks system. And it's under his presidency that the United States begins to kind of become a world power. Now, Wilson contributes in this effort of making the United States a world power. He expands the ability of the president to regulate the economy and secures the overseas interests of the United States during World War I. FDR. This is when the United States cements itself as a superpower. The New Deal creates all sorts of new social programs, Social Security being one of them. And of course, World War II and the Great Depression, these two simultaneous crises, enable FDR to become the only president to serve more than 2 terms. JFK. He was not president for long, but what he changed in the presidency was this ability to communicate via media. JFK was the first television president and was very effective at using television as a means to communicate with the nation. For this reason, he still remains very popular. Reagan kind of does the same thing, and they called Reagan the great communicator because of his ability to speak, and oftentimes the great presidents. They have this ability to look at the camera and you feel like they're talking to you. Reagan had this, Kennedy had this, Obama had this. Not many presidents have this. He also pushes for a new conservative agenda, which sees a lot of rollback in social spending in the United States. George W. Bush, of course, was president during 9/11, and really the nation rallied behind his president. Now, presidency after this. This came with, of course, a huge expansion of the government power. Of course, the Patriot Act is still in effect today, which gives the government huge supervision powers over American citizens. So then we have this question: how important are presidents? How much of this accomplishment came from presidents, and how much of it is presidents responding to particular crises? Is it the case that great presidents are merely products of great times? Lincoln inherited many of the issues which defined his presidency. FDR stepped into the Great Depression. There's this mix of personality and the greater environment into which presidents enter that defines a great or transformative president. The best presidents, ranked by historians, are often the ones who step up to the plate or see the need and fulfill that need. Now, my final question to you guys is, are we in a moment of two presidents? I have to say that I think we can all agree, no matter where we stand on partisanship, that Donald Trump was a unusual president. If we want to talk about someone who utilized popular communication, and people would often complain about Donald Trump's use of Twitter, but there is a method to this madness. There's this direct and, quite frankly, constant communication with his base that no other president has engaged in. So Donald Trump was engaging his base more frequently, more often. He held more rallies than any other sitting president, to the point where he delegated much of governing to Mike Pence so he could go do these rallies. Now, the genius of this is that Donald Trump was always in election mode. There was never a moment where his base was not thinking of him. But by doing this, he did create this part of the country that I don't think really identified as Republicans as much as they did Trump voters. So you had a new block of voters who were really loyal to or preferred one person. And then we had Joe Biden, who of course won the 22 election. But while it is not uncommon to see elections contested in Latin America, it's very rare in the United States to see elections contested. And it's though there's nothing by law that requires the loser of an election to concede, it has been a long-standing practice in democracies, in the United States in particular, for the loser to congratulate the winner. This is done so the nation rallies behind the winner, the the time for partisanship stops, and the time for governing begins. This, of course, did not happen when Donald Trump left the White House. And now we have a moment where it seems that there's a large portion of the country that simply does not recognize the authority of Joe Biden. So, do we have a precedent for this? Do we have something to compare this to in U.S. history? I'd argue that we have a few things we could try and compare it to. In 2016, Trump, of course, won the 2016 election, and he did not win the popular vote. So you had all these voters who said Donald Trump is not my president, which was this emotional statement. It was this statement to say Donald Trump does not represent my values, but it was ultimately it was a statement that didn't really mean much, guys, and I know a lot of people felt that way. But Donald Trump was still legally the president of the United States, just as Joe Biden is still legally the president of the United States. They are both lawfully, if not popularly, elected presidents. So we might compare it to that. We might also compare it to the election of 2000, where Bush did not win the popular vote, but the Supreme Court said that the Electoral College vote is ultimately what would decide a president. Al Gore accepted this and stepped aside. Could we compare it to Lincoln? I hope not. Because when Lincoln was elected, of course, much of the country split away because it would not accept his presidency. And traditionally, former presidents have sort of stepped away. Bush was very quiet during Obama's years. Clinton was very quiet during Bush's years. Reagan went off to live a very private life after his presidency. That is not what Donald Trump has elected to do. And even without Twitter and this mechanism of constant communication, it seems that he has found a new channel to constantly communicate with his base. And that is the Republican Party as a whole. Now you have congressmen, congresswomen, senators acting as surrogates not of their constituents, but of a former president. This is very unusual. It's very unusual for a president who has been defeated at the polls to remain the head of their political party. We will see what consequences, if any, the Republican Party incurs by making this choice. We do find this, though, in different countries. In Latin America, Oftentimes, presidents simply don't step aside and they remain active. Sometimes they become senators or pundits. And it really does erode trust in public institutions. This is a very harmful practice because there's always one president. And to say that there are two inherently undermines the legitimacy of the United States government. But it's very difficult to wrest power back from these populist presidents who derive their legitimacy not through elections, but through engagement of their base. That's all I have for you guys now. Some things we can talk about in person. Thank you, and have a great weekend.